On today's show, unfortunately for the Hawks and for Jalen Johnson, his season is over, and we'll react to all of what that's going to mean for the Hawks, for Jalen, and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1898 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you midday here on a Wednesday in late January. And today's podcast is sponsored by the book Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, make it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts, including on YouTube. Please like the video as you're watching it there and support the show by spreading the word for us to get the word out to your family and your friends. If you missed it, I recorded a podcast only a few hours ago on Tuesday evening into Wednesday, breaking down a close-fought loss for the Hawks. If you're a new listener, welcome aboard to the show. Please subscribe. Check out the archives. We've been covering the team for a very long time on this show, 8+ years and beyond. But the headline news today is, and the reasons for this emergency episode of Locked On Hawks podcast, is that Jalen Johnson season is over. So if you missed it, Thursday, 5 days ago at this point in time, he suffered an injury in the first half of the loss to the Raptors. If you missed the play, he got tangled up with Scotty Barnes and immediately was clutching his left shoulder and went straight to the locker room, like right away. Do not pass go, any of that stuff. And the Hawks rolled him out for the game very quickly, to the point where it was clear it was not just a minor incident of some kind. Obviously, everyone was hoping for something more minor than not. The Hawks gave a semi-update on Saturday afternoon, but I want to say that basically he was still being evaluated and tested to see what was going on and the next steps for the Hawks. Crucially, I'm going to timestamp this right now. I am recording this podcast at about 11:30 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday. At the moment, nothing is official from the team. With that said, Chris Haynes of various outlets, Bleacher Report, etc., reported that Jalen suffered a torn labrum and that his season is over. As I record this again, I have had a source confirm to me that Johnson is going to miss the season with surgery of some kind. The Hawks not yet said exactly what the injury is. I think it's a torn labrum. We'll see. That's been reported by Haynes. I have no reason to believe that he's wrong on that front, but that's where we are at this moment in time. I want to get the podcast to you as fast as I possibly can. But either way, season over for Jalen Johnson. And the big news, of course, like with 35 games left in the season, the Hawks will not have their second best player for the rest of the way. And that's obviously a massive, massive blow for the team. It's also brutal for Jalen Johnson, who was having his breakout season. Later on in the show, I'll dive into what's kind of next for the Hawks, how they're going to do this, how they're going to weather the storm potentially in the coming days. But the first thing, again, I just want to leave with this. This is absolutely just terrible news. Like, I am very much into the nuance and the detail. I want to give you all the full picture of things. But in the end, this is an injury that's going to cost him several months. It won't be fun to come back from for Jalen Johnson. You know, all indications are he'll be fine for next year. Like, that is not like a concern long term. But the timing is awful for the Hawks. They were playing really well. And when Jalen went down, it wasn't immediately, but basically immediately they've gone into a not so good run right now. As I'm recording this podcast, they've lost 6 games in a row, which speaks for itself. So there's some noise in there, other injuries in there as well, but they are just simply not the same team without Jalen Johnson. And really, he arrived nationally during this season. You know, last year I thought he was very much underrated, to be honest, nationally, because the people hadn't just quite seen him enough yet. But this year he was getting some fringe all-star buzz, and deservedly so. And it's just the timing of this is obviously just terrible, and nothing is good about this news for anyone involved. Before I get to the kind of fallout of this, I just want to take a second to kind of chronicle Jalen's season a little bit. He finishes with 19 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists per game on the year. Only 4 players in the league have averaged those numbers in those categories this year beyond Jalen. Nikola Jokic, the best player in the world. Giannis, a top 5 player in the world, or top 3 player in the world, however you want to say that. Awesome player. Domantas Sabonis, really good player, all-star. And then Alperen Sengun, who the Hawks saw last night, who's not quite as good as those other guys, but still is a very, very good player. And then Jalen. That's the 5 guys who've been at 19, 10, and 5 for the season. Jalen has been a legitimately great rebounder, which is always underrated in his game. Obviously, he's a high flyer, all those things. The transition game is awesome, but he's a great rebounder, like actually great. Top 15 in the league this year in rebounds per game. Top 20 defensive rebound rate, despite being not a center. Most guys who rebound the way that Jalen does are centers, and he is not. So that's a huge value add to the team. Only 40 players in the NBA this year are averaging 5 assists per more, 5 assists per game or more. Jalen's one of them. And he's not a point guard. Like, as you would imagine, most of that top 40 list is a bunch of guards and superstars, basically. Jalen's not a superstar yet, but certainly a guy who has a really high-end passer. The other non-guards basically are like Jokic and Giannis, who are stars, or guys that are like past first players, like Draymond Green's up there, but he's mostly just a passer on offense, etc. And yeah, Jalen's shooting efficiency did dip a little bit this year because when he struggled when he returned from the right shoulder issue that he actually had in early January. In his first 32 games this year, he was totally fine before the shoulder injury happened on the other side of his body. He had 58% true shooting, 56% effective goal percentage, like both very, very solid numbers. In the 4 games he played between shoulder injuries, between the right shoulder injury and the left one, he didn't make shots. And I think he was probably a little bit banged up a little bit, but that dragged him down a little bit for the season. And yes, he does need to be more efficient moving forward. Like if you want to kind of just say that out loud, I think he would certainly own that. As his usage has gone up this year to a career high level on a team where he just is very clearly the number 2 option now for the first time in his career. His efficiency has gone down a little bit, but still really good at the rim, 2-point shooting, etc. He's not shot well from 3 this year, but I'm not worried about that necessarily. I think his true talent as a 3-point shooter is certainly very, very okay. If nothing else, we'll see how good it is. It's passable. We'll see where that actually lands. But no matter what, he's also been durable. Like I've seen some people, how do I say this? People saying that he's now injury prone. I just wouldn't agree to that. I mean, it's obviously early in his career still. I know this is year 4, but he played 70 games as a second year player. He got banged up a little bit last year, and this year he's missed half the season. Yeah, he's had a couple injuries, but I don't throw the injury prone label around lightly, and I don't think he's there yet at this point in time. He also was top 20 in the NBA this year in minutes per game, about 36 per game. He's extremely vital to what the Hawks do on both ends of the floor, which we'll talk about a lot more later on in this podcast. And here, like the Hawks have a +2 or so net rating this year with Jalen Johnson on the court. Obviously, they're not a 60-win team with him, to be very clear. Like they're not that good this year. They've been good with Jalen Johnson. Like I would say that with firm conviction. They're not a title contender with Jalen Johnson, but they play their best very clearly when he's on the court. And that is the case in the opposite direction as well. The Hawks have a -8.5 net rating this season without Jalen Johnson on the court. That's just with him on the bench, either not playing in the game or not on the court during that period of time. So basically about a 10-point swing in per 100 possessions when Jalen is on compared to when he is off the floor. That is one of the bigger swings in the league for a high-minute player like Jalen Johnson. And that's kind of a good bridge to talk about in a second. The impact of the injury, the rest of the season, how the Hawks are going to weather the storm on this. There's plenty more to get to, and all that's coming up in just 1 second. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes and their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can actually focus on your day. An expert who will also find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. And all so you get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. That is TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. With some updates only on iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So I just laid out that the Hawks are pretty good when Jalen plays, and at least when it comes to on-off splits, not very good when he doesn't play this year. Generally speaking, I think the stats paint a very accurate picture on that front. Part of that is that Jalen's really good. So just to say this out loud, I think I remember kind of a rant that I did earlier this summer into the fall is that multiple outlets left him off their top 100 player lists coming into the season. I thought that was crazy, and it became very evident that was crazy this season. I already knew it was crazy. Now people kind of generally know this. I think that looks even crazier now, of course. If he's not already a top 50 player, he's right there. I'd have him already in the top 50 personally. I think he was a legitimate all-star candidate this year. If you want to say he's closer to 50 than 25, sure. But he's a very, very good player already at a very young age who still is a pretty young, not in terms of how many minutes he's played in his career, to be honest, after a late start to the game. But anyway, the other part beyond Jalen being very good, and he is that they don't have a replacement for him on the roster. If you follow the team all year long or follow the podcast all year long, that will not be a surprise to you. It is very obvious the Hawks have no one that can approximate what Jalen does on either end of the floor. But backup power forward has been a question mark even before he's actually started. Many of us pointed that out this summer. Like, it was a question mark. They have guys there that can play some minutes. DeAndre Hunter, the most chief among them. And he can play the 4. He will play the 4. He's been playing the most minutes there since Jalen went down. But he's a much different player than Jalen Johnson. DeAndre Hunter is good. DeAndre Hunter makes shots. He's a shot creator. He's a shot maker. He's a solid enough defender. Like, he's the kind of guy that every team is looking for on some level. But he's not a rim protector defensively. He isn't a rebounder either in the way that Jalen Johnson is. And on offense, he's not a playmaker the way that Jalen Johnson is, both in creating off the bounce, pushing in transition, passing, none of that. Obviously, he's a better shooter than Jalen, but that's pretty much it when it comes to what he is better at than Jalen Johnson right now. And then after Hunter, who is a real replacement, but again, very different player, it's kind of a wasteland behind Hunter. Now, it's not a disaster in every circumstance, but there's a lot of uncertainty, we'll say. Just to say this quickly, obviously David Roddy is not the answer. He's played minutes there. It hasn't gone well this year. We'll leave that there for now. You got Larry Nance Jr., who I do believe is a good, solid rotation level piece, but he's been much better at the 5 than the 4 this year. The minutes with him at the 4 have not worked this season. I'm sure he'll play more there now because Jalen is out, but that's not a great option. I think he's much more of a center at this point in time. There's that. You also have a couple of the young combo bigs, Mo Gay and Dom Barlow you can try. They started Mo Gay on Tuesday night. He played helpful minutes, I would say. He's still pretty raw, but the skill set there is intriguing. The athleticism there is intriguing. Obviously, he's a very gifted and talented guy. Barlow is a guy I like, but still kind of probably more of a center than a power forward, etc. And I would say it's fair to project that neither Mo Gay nor Dom Barlow is likely to be awesome right now. Mo Gay can help them. I think based on last night, he'll probably play some real minutes, and he probably should after this, but he's not Jalen Johnson, let's just say. He can also play a little bit smaller. You got Zachary Richeche. If he is around, he did not play last night, but played the game before that. He can at least fake it at the 4 with his length on defense. If you play Hunter and Richeche together, you have enough length and size to get by. That's probably their best forward tandem if they're both available right now. You throw in some Krejci, you throw in some Dyson Daniels, like, you're not dying there, but there's just not a lot of forward options as is, and that's even magnified more. Richeche is not around, as he hasn't been all the time in recent days. And not to paint a dire picture here, but it's important to at least note, again, how massive this injury loss is in terms of team quality. And I know that people, there's this whole mantra of some fans that's like, no excuses. I don't give excuses. I like to explain things and give you actual context. And look, for the team, no, you don't go in your locker room if you're Quinn Snyder and say, all right, guys, we're missing a bunch of guys. We won't be as good tonight. That's not the way you say that. But on the outside looking in, nothing that I say impacts the team. So I can actually give you context. All that said, the win-loss record is not actually as stark as the on-off splits. They're 4-7 now when Jalen does not play this season. That's not good. It's not totally disastrous. They should basically be 4-8 because I believe they probably would have won the Raptors game that he left with the injury last week. That doesn't count because he did play in the game. But so if you want to say 4-7, whatever, 4-8, whatever, but that's semantics. It has not been a total disaster, but the games that they've actually won without Jalen this year have been favorable matchups, we'll say. They beat the Kings without Sabonis, DeRozan, and Monk, 3 of their top 5 players, by 1 point. They beat the Jazz. The Jazz are very bad and tanking, and that was a close game as well. They beat the Bulls in the infamous Daquan Plowden Keaton Wallace game, where like everything went right for the Hawks that night. And, hey, they won the game, but not always like a predictor of the future. And they beat the Suns as well, and the Suns are kind of a mess. And you needed Trae Young to have 43 points in that game, and Congo had a 20-20 game in that game, and they still barely won. So I tend to think that the team quality is a little bit closer to what the on-off splits say than the win-loss record says. But they can win games without Jalen Johnson. Like I said that last night on the show, people got a little bit frustrated with me. I'm not saying that they're going to be the same team. They're not the same team. They are worse without Jalen Johnson. I don't take any pleasure in saying that. It's just the reality. It's a huge, huge loss. I've been saying it all year long. The splits tell the story. And yeah, you could argue who they're more easily able to navigate life without, Trae or Jalen. That's a fair argument to make. But the two of them are in a separate tier. Anybody else that's missing games, they can kind of live without, and they can operate certain times. Without Trae or without Jalen, they become a different team immediately. That's the case, and that's going to be the case now moving forward. They can win games, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So the big question is, what happens from here? I'll dive into that more in a second. I'll just say this first as a teaser for what we're about to get into. The deadline is a week away. And I know fans are going to want big trades. They always do, to plug the hole for Jalen Johnson. But even before this, they wanted big trades. Everyone wants transactions. Fans want action. But even more so when you lose your second best player, who was in the mix for most improved player and potential all-star selection this year. I do think this is going to potentially, not definitely, potentially impact what they would plan to do. And that's very logical. Now, there's two arguments that you can make. One is, all right, how do we get better to paper over the loss of Jalen Johnson? Number two is maybe a more realistic tone, maybe more of a big picture tone to say, all right, what are we without Jalen Johnson? Do we want to kind of pivot toward the future a little bit more? Now, as we get into more in a second, the Hawks cannot tank. That was a question I got people today. Like, all right, the Hawks are just going to tank now. As a reminder, the Hawks do not have their own first round pick this year. That pick is gone as part of the first DeJounte Murray trade. So the Hawks losing games, quote unquote, on purpose or tanking or getting bad, that's not a viable option. Like, there could be moves the Hawks could make that are future facing that might actually make them worse in the short term. But while some teams in this position might justifiably lean into the void a little bit, shut guys down, maybe try to lose some games, etc., the Hawks don't have any reason to actually do that. This has been a season, as I've been saying all year long, where there are conflicting interests, but there's no reason to get worse. They're also not all in to win right now either, but there's a lot of balls in the air. But just as a quick reminder before we get to the next segment, there is no reason for the Hawks to try to lose games. They don't have their own pick, and that doesn't matter anymore. Okay, more to come in just 1 second when it comes to the deadline, the mixed bag that's going to be happening there. Questions that you might have on Jalen Johnson that I can kind of quickly answer, or that's coming up in just 1 second. This show is brought to you by Gametime. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I've been at NFL playoff games, multiple cities, of course, but most of them have actually been happening in Atlanta. It's easy to remember that excitement at the old Georgia Dome or even in Mercedes-Benz Stadium that's down there now. And at Gametime, they make it easier for you to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature. It's called Gametime Picks. They take away the fluff and only show you the incredible deals on great seats. No actual wasting time of aimless searches. That's a really valuable thing for me. Recently, I looked for tickets for a football game using the Gametime app. And with this feature, Gametime Picks, I found amazing deals. Super deal as well was particularly impressive and offering great seats at unbeatable prices. And the app has features like being able to see the view from your seats before you actually buy them, plus all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout. It made experience smooth and reliable, plus the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me peace of mind as well. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets right now with the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, use that account. It's great. Create that one right now with Gametime and use that code LOCKEDONNBA, locked on NBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so I teased us out a little bit about how the Hawks have a bunch of conflicting things. They've been pretty good this year. They're not all in. They can't tank. They're out some future picks. They did kind of restore their coffers a little bit with the trade to get Dyson 2 picks from the Pelicans. A great trade, if I do say so myself. But that first Murray trade, not the best. In fact, it was quite bad. And that cost them their pick this year, which is a flexibility concern in some respects. On one hand, they've already been potential buyers, and they would have been potential buyers before this. But not probably a huge, huge swing. But they have expiring contracts. They got Capella, they got Nance, they got Roddy. They got Zeller. All those guys are expiring and could be easily moved in different deals. They also have Bogey, who's having a bad season, but still has appeal to other teams who are trying to win now because he's a veteran, respected player around the league on a pretty good contract. They have some future capital as well. They got the Kings pick. They have the Lakers pick. They have their own picks in the very long future. They got Kobe Buffett as a sweetener, Mo Gay as a sweetener. All that stuff kind of out there if they want to kind of make buy moves in the future. But for me, I was already in the mode, and I said this before the Jalen injury. If you're a listener to the podcast regularly, you will know that I will say this before. What I mean is, you don't just buy to buy for this season. This is a year where, yes, it helps. There's no reason to not try to win games. The Hawks are trying to win every night, but it's not a season where you were going to be a title contender, even with Jalen Johnson, and even more so now without him. Your ceiling is lower. That's just the reality of the situation. And I already felt this, that you shouldn't be making a move to get better this year unless it also makes you better in the future. What I would never have done as the Hawks this year, even pre-injury, was to make a real substantial investment of real first-round capital, that kind of thing, in a rental or someone who is older, it wasn't going to help you in the future. If you can make a buy trade right now that will help you if it helps you beyond the season. So that's an important distinction that I would make. Some of these expiring contracts, guys who don't want to come back to the team, I wouldn't be willing to do that if I was the Hawks, even before this. I know most fans know this, but again, I got a barrage of questions about this. Not having your own pick just changes the dynamics a little bit. Like teams like the Nets have pivoted hard. The Pelicans this year, after a bad start, have kind of pivoted a little bit towards tanking to some degree. Like the Hawks don't need to do that because they don't have their own pick. You can still make future-facing moves. It makes sense. Like getting worse in the short term is not the reason for that. You could still quote-unquote sell, not to get worse this year, but to restock the cupboard. Like, for instance, if you were to trade Bogey for a future-facing package, or Capella, or Nance, or even something like Hunter, which I wouldn't probably do, but it's always possible to me that they could trade Hunter in the next week if they got a little bit of a sweet offer for him. But no matter what, you're trying to get value for the future because that's the focus now is the future. Obviously, you want to make the playoffs this year. We'll end the podcast on that and kind of that possibility. But it does matter more. The future already mattered more than this year for me, and it matters even more so now without Jalen the rest of the season. So, look, the Jalen injury brings down the high-end outcomes considerably this year. Like, I'm not as optimistic as some people were, but yeah, you could have convinced me that if the Hawks had stayed healthy, and they've been banged up before this, but they had been healthy, and you had Jalen and Dyson and Trey the rest of the year pretty healthy, they could have been still in the mix for like the 6th seed in the East and missing the play-in entirely, just being fully in the first round of a series. Would they have been an underdog in the first round? Yes, but like that's a realistic outcome that they could have pursued. I would be surprised now if they were not, if they were able to get out of the play-in without being in the play-in from this point forward. Like they're 2 games behind Miami, 1.5 behind Orlando, 1.5 behind Detroit. It's not impossible, but they're just worse without Jalen. So it's like, let's just pragmatically speaking, that's not likely to happen. With that said, so that's their high-end outcomes coming down a little bit. And that reason to buy at the deadline might be a little bit lower than it was a few days ago. But that does not mean you bottom out or you sell for no reason. Some of the more aggressive moves may be off the table for the Hawks, but you could still buy, you could still sell, you can still kind of tweak on the margins. Like there's the flexibility is still there for Atlanta in the way that it was before this. Trades are hard. I always say that. Fans don't like it. I promise you it's true though. Trades are hard. The most likely thing overall is the Hawks probably not doing very much because that's the like for most teams, the most likely outcome is not doing a lot. Some teams just decided they're going to do something. The Hawks don't really do that. The Hawks are not really a team that's like, we're going to make a big move. They might make a big move, but they're not necessarily a team that is going to decide that and then just do it at all costs. You can disagree with the strategy, but Landry and Kyle and company have been pretty not like slow move. They've been pretty safe. They've been pretty level-headed, I would say, for better and for worse sometimes, but they've not been like rash since the big Murray trade, which was the kind of the reported Nick Ressler push, all that stuff. Since they've kind of reset things, brought in Ansi Salah, all of that, they've been pretty level-headed. Anyway, long story short, there's not a button they can press to easily replace Jalen Johnson. One more time. There's not a button they can press to easily replace Jalen Johnson. Like, they could go out and add a body for the forward room at some point. That's pretty easy to do for depth purposes if they want to. I think if they do not trade Cody Zeller between now and Thursday, they will waive him at some point shortly after the deadline. I'm not saying that's 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident in that they would no reason to keep him after the deadline if they don't trade him. So that could be a spot to add a point guard or add a power forward to the mix. It won't be an exciting player probably, but somebody to bring some more depth to the table. You'll probably play Reese Shea more at the 4. Hunter will play a lot of 4. You'll see some Mogay and Don Barlow. You might see Nance at the 4. You might see Roddy. People will hate that. The Hawks do have a lot of bodies to throw at the problem, but in the end, none of them are Jalen Johnson. So last thing. At the moment, the Hawks are, as I record this podcast on Wednesday, still 3 games ahead of the 11th spot in the East. So they are firmly in the play-in mix in the East. And one of the questions I got from several people was like, okay, can the Hawks still make the playoffs? Yes, they can. 35 games to play, 3-game lead. I would still pick the Hawks to make the play-in at this moment. Now, injuries could change that. Trades could change that if they get worse in a trade. But if they keep Trey and Dyson pretty healthy and don't get destroyed elsewhere with injuries, they can hold a 3-game lead over the Sixers and the Bulls, like I think they could still kind of hold on. They won't be as good as they were with Jalen. That's just the reality, probably, but they can still make the playoffs for sure. But this is also, just to be 100% candid, the first time this season, over the last few days when I thought Jalen might be out for the year, when I kind of heard some rumblings and here we are, that I think it's actually possible that they don't play in at least the postseason of some kind, which includes the play-in. Until now, I thought it was pretty close to a lock. The Hawks were going to be at least in the play-in. And I felt that since basically August. Even more so once the season got going and they were playing at a level that I thought they were going to play at, 500 or better. And the baseline in the East to make the play-ins is pretty low. But it stinks. That's just the reality, is that the floor outcomes are lower now than they've been at any point in the season because Jalen is that important to the team. So now, and also if you get a Dyson injury or you get a Trey injury or you get a Hunter injury, it falls even further. That's one of the things about injuries, is that one guy you can kind of get by with. Obviously, Jalen's one to not get by with, but you know what I mean? It's the cluster. So if you now, especially Hunter, if Hunter goes out, they're going to be in some trouble. And obviously, Trey has always been the case. So it stinks, but it's the reality. Jalen was having a great season. He was deservedly on the fringe of the All-Star conversation and very obviously in the top two of guys on the Hawks who they can't afford to be without alongside Trae Young. That's very obvious. And now he won't be available. And that makes the team less effective, less good, and honestly, less fun to watch. Like, I don't always talk about this as much as some others might. I do analyze the game. I'm working as a member of the media. But as a fan of basketball, and I'm sure a Hawks fan, Jalen's fun to watch. It's a more entertaining product when he's out there. He makes highlight plays. He's just fun. I like Jalen. Like he's a fun guy to watch and root for, and all of that. So I'll have more in the future on all of this. That's my random, assortment of notes and unloading on things. And again, I just checked this is about noon. Still no announcement from the Hawks. At some point today, they'll announce something, I'm sure, with details and maybe a timeline. We'll see. But long story short, no Jalen the rest of the year. That's kind of brutal. I will have content later this week. So if you are a new listener, again, welcome aboard. Please subscribe to the show. But what I do is I have generally 5 shows a week or more during the season. I cover every game with a post-game show talking about all of what transpired in those games. I did 2 shows the last 2 nights. I'll have trade deadline content because, again, it's a week from tomorrow. It's a safe bet at some point that the Hawks will at least be involved in a rumor or a trade or something that I can talk about in the next week. Plus, they have a game on Thursday. The Hawks play a national TV game, actually, a TNT game on Thursday. 7 o'clock start, earlier start for PSA and everybody. They play in Cleveland, a team that they've actually beaten twice this year, but that'll be a tough challenge in some respects. We have eyes on the market for sure. There was, of course, well-documented weirdness that I talked about yesterday on the show with Bogey and with Capella the last couple of days. Are they in trade rumors? Are they not? Personal reasons for Bogey, backspasses for Clint. There's all of that. They could trade Nance. They could trade Zeller. They could trade Roddy. Like, it is what it is. There's a lot going on right now, but that's what I have today. Unfortunate news for the Hawks and Jalen Johnson and Hawks fans. It's all just bad. Even people around the league. Like, I made some calls before I did the podcast. People with no affiliation to the Hawks, people are sad about this. Like, everyone likes Jalen Johnson. Trae Young sent a emoji, less than positive tweet about Jalen Johnson news. Like, no one's having a good time right now. It's awful. Injuries suck. I wish we could turn the injury slider off. Everyone understands that. But it's the reality of the sport, and we'll get into more of what's happening tomorrow. If something happens between now and the game tomorrow, I will try to do another show. If there's something major, a trade or whatever. If not, this will be the Wednesday into Thursday podcast. I'll have one after the game on Thursday. So please stay tuned. Please subscribe to the show on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube, etc. Please like the video there as well. Tell your friends about the podcast. Ratings and reviews. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Follow me as well at Blue Sky at BT Rowland. I'm also on Patreon as a Hawks writer / I share some extra audio there, insights, etc. It's patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. As always, this is Emergency Podcast, and we'll see you all next time.